Greetings again. This is Ray Mofield with a traveling microphone for the Oral History Project, in which we supply tapes not only to the radio station but the state archives in Frankfort and the Marshall County Library. We're visiting today with Nell Irvan Pace, who lives on US 68, not far from Kentucky 95. And as it so happens, I've known her for quite a while, and she may not want this told, but we were slight relatives at least. Miss Pace, it's good to see you and see you smiling so happily here. We want to start off by what I hope doesn't embarrass you. How old are you?
I'm 74. I was born in June 1910.
Now, you had a long connection with Hardin. You were an Irvan before you married?
Yes, I was Dr. O.B. Irvin's daughter from Murray.
Now, he was a dentist?
A dentist,
I know I've been to his office with my mother a number of times when I was a tiny boy. We lived somewhere around Hardin or Alamo much of my early life. Now, since you were his daughter, you must be kin to the founder of Hardin.
He was my great-grandfather, Hardin Davenport Irvin, and his wife was Amanda Ellison, and incidentally, I was her namesake. My name is Amanda also.
Amanda as well as Nell. Well, I never knew that before.
I kept it a secret when I was a little girl.
Well, now they've written songs about Amanda.
Oh, I know it. I wish they'd call me that now.
Yeah. All right. So we know your father and we know your mother. Or did we get your father's name?
O.B. Oscar Brown.
Right. Oscar Brown Irvin. And now, do you know your grandparents?
I knew my grandmother, Virginia Irvin, but my grandfather, John Thomas, who was Hardin Irvin's son, died when my father was a very young boy.
There was a Thomas Irvin that owned, I believe, Murray Lumber Company.
Well, that was Thomas Irvin Hughes. He was an old cousin to my father.
A cousin. I had the wrong last name there for a moment. And, of course, Irvin Hughes, the physician in Hardin.
And his name was Hardin Irvin Hughes. He was, they had, everybody named everybody after everybody. Nearly all the females we must have been very fond of the name Irvin because most of us put an Irvin on one of their children's names. One of my boys is incidentally Charles Irvin Pace.
Well, you know, I've never done a whole lot in genealogy, but a fellow named Manning Stewart, who was first president of our Jackson Purchase Historical Society and a prominent attorney, and told me one time that his parents or grandparents gave the land for Stewart Cemetery, which is not too far from the Marshall County, Callaway line. And he said, now your great-great-grandfather, I don't know how many greats it was now, maybe 3, came to Wadesboro along with my great-grandfather, and they were with a company of people around Bannister Wade, and they named Wadesboro after him, and that was the first county seat. So I got to looking it up, and I found, you talk about confusing, that man's name was John Irvin. And then he had a son named John S. Irvin, maybe it wasn't, John L., I guess. And John L. was Hardin Davenport's brother. And they ran him for office along about the Civil War, and he was state representative from Callaway County. And then his son was named John Irvin, which was my great-grandfather, the father of Solon Irvin, my grandfather, and then, of course, the father of my mother, Zela Irvin, Mofield later. So, they're just, when you get into genealogy, you talk about naming one another after one another, there was 3 or 4 generations of John Irvins.
Well, my grandfather was John. He was John Thomas Irvin.
Yes. Well, now, was he the one that, there was a John Irvin of some sort that I found that was railroad agent at Hardin, And postmaster.
Yes, he was the postmaster. You know the store that backed Ryan Miller's store?
Yes.
That big store there. Mm-hmm. Well, he and I think it was a Hughes and a Jones ran the store, and then my grandfather, John Thomas Irvin, was the postmaster.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we'll try to get out of John Irvin sometime.
Well, yes, let's do. I have a son named John.
Yeah. Well, tell us about where you went to school.
Well, I went to school in Murray, mm-hmm. but I loved Hardin. My grandmother lived in Hardin, and I visited down there every summer, and on Sunday afternoon, my father would get out the T-model Ford, mm-hmm. and as many of us as he could carry on that trip, we would go to Hardin to see my grandmother. But, of course, I didn't get to go every Sunday because there was too many of us. There were 9 children. And it wasn't always my turn, but I loved going by myself and staying at my grandma's because we always went to meet the train at night. That was a social event of the day.
Yes.
In fact, when I was 16 years old, I met the man that I later married at the railroad station. Boer Sutley introduced him to me, and we courted for 7 years, I think, and I finally married him. That was Keith Pace.
Keith Pace,
mm-hmm.
Yes. You talk about people meeting the train. I remember that.
Oh, that was the most exciting thing that romantic and...
There's a little story that I've included in this Jackson Purchase history this year about Hardin, and it concerns a traveling man who was arriving in Hardin for the first time, and so he asked the conductor on the train when they got out of Benton, says, "What's the next stop?" He said, "Well, it'll be Hardin." He said, "Well, how large a place is Hardin?" And the conductor said, "I don't know, but they'll all meet the train. You can count them." So that was a social event.
It certainly was. The girls spent the afternoon rolling up their hair and getting all primed up to meet, hoping they'd meet some boy at the station that night. And usually she did.
Yeah. All right, you went to school in Murray, and of course Hardin is right on the line, and Callaway and Marshall were the same county for many, many years, from the first founding in 1822 up till 1842. So, do you remember any of your teachers?
Oh, every one of them.
In fact, some of them came from Hardin in the days of the Phil Beck. Wasn't he from Hardin?
Yes, but now he didn't teach till after I had finished high school. I went to school to Ted Sanford, and I went to school to Lockie Hart, and Kathy Beale, and Desiree Beale, and Anna Hood, Mr. Moser.
Some great teachers.
Yeah.
I remember Mr. Moser well, and of course some of the others too.
Now, when I was in about the third or fourth grade, I can't remember which, the old school burned, and then the new school was built. And the year I was in the 6th grade, we were there. Well, the year I was in the 7th grade, Murray had gotten the normal school, mm-hmm. for which we were just delighted. But I didn't know what it was, but I certainly was delighted. And it housed the college on the ground floor, and then all the grades in the high school were on the 2 upper floors. Mm-hmm. And that was really exciting to see all those people going to the normal school.
Yeah.
And then, of course, when I finished high school, then I went, but it wasn't a normal school when I started in 29. Of course, that was a Depression year. And would you believe that I went to school 3 whole years, and it cost me $30, $5 a semester. I walked to school, and I came home for lunch. All I had to buy was my books. And that, of course, that $5, that was all that it cost me. That's something.
The story of the economy.
I mean, it was economy.
That beats any story I could tell. I think I counted up once that it cost me $500 to get a bachelor's degree. But tuition had gone up to $25 a semester when I went. And I took my lunch from home, though, and got from Hardin one way or another, driving Ed Kello part of the time. And Anyway, it was free, much of it.
Well, I went back to school. I didn't see, I went 3 years, and then of course it was during the Depression, and I got a job teaching school, and I taught a couple of years, and then I got married. I thought I had it made, so I didn't teach anymore until after the war, when they were just begging for teachers. Well, I had a certificate and taught, and then decided to go back to school. So I've always laughed and said that I started school in 1929, but I didn't finish till 1958. I was a senior a long time,
Yeah.
but I finally got it made.
All right. Do you remember any funny stories about any things that happened when you were growing up?
Well, we always wondered how they would ever finish the college, because my 3 brothers, who were just regular reprobates, I think they tore down everything that the carpenters built during the day. The boys tore it down that night.
Oh, my.
Wasn't that awful?
Yeah.
My brothers said that a lot of times that they would think nothing of pushing a whole barrel full of, they just push it over for no reason whatsoever.
Sort of like a Halloween trick.
Yeah, all year long.
Your dad's had a dental place at least one time, it seems to me, I remember, on the west side of the square.
That's right. He started on the...
Was it upstairs?
It was upstairs.
Yeah. I remember going with my mother there about 1930.
Yeah, he died in 35. But he was, I guess he stayed longer in that one place than he did anywhere else.
Now, you've told us about how you met Keith and that you courted for 7 years. Were there any funny things that happened over that period?
Well, yes, quite a few. It was a long trip from Hardin to Murray in those days, because that was before they had built 641. It wasn't built till 29.
So you had to go into Wadesboro.
Yes.
On the old gravel road.
And no one always had a car. Someone, or however you would say. Anyway, I only saw him, and besides, he went to school in Lexington. I was about a sophomore in high school when I met him, but he had already started college. And then when he finished college, the Depression had hit, and he couldn't get a job at all. And so finally, we just, with no job, well, he was working in Ryan Miller's store, and it was his father's store, and he was working there, so we just got married anyway. And
and you married?
We managed, made it just fine.
Well, did you prove the old adage that 2 can live as cheaply as 1?
I think so. I had my great-grandfather was a very economical person. My father was always reminding us that any time that if you ate dinner or breakfast or any meal at his house, and if you poured out more molasses and you ate at that meal, so the next meal it was set before you, and you ate it before you got anything else. And Daddy always reminded us of that when he was trying to bring home an economical lesson. Of course, he didn't apply to him, but it did to the children.
Well, those Irvans must have been a lot alike. My mother's made me do similar things over the years, and she always said, now, you know, the Bible teaches that it's a sin to waste food. It says, don't you remember that when Jesus fed the 5,000, that they gathered up all the scraps that were left and put them in a basket and saved them? So that was impressed on me at an early date. And after you ate 2 or 3 old plates of molasses that had been around for a day or two, it was even more impressed on you.
Oh, I mean it was.
Yeah. What did you like most in school?
Well, I would have to say I liked recess better than anything else. I was not a student. I was there, but I'm ashamed to say this, but in my college annual, under my name, it said, "What a whirlpool of fun and mischief goes around in her head." That's on the paper. And some of them they put, these nice things. My father and mother were very disappointed in my in that.
Well, I think you fooled all of them. You turned out you finished school. Now, it took you a while, as you said.
It took me a while.
But in the very early days, I know I've heard some people say that they got a certificate merely for finishing the 8th grade and passing a test at the county superintendent's office. I think if you made 85, you could teach. Now, you had more preparation than that when you started teaching.
Oh, yes, I had been to college 3 years when I started teaching. And I taught at Murray a couple of years. And, of course, then it didn't require a degree. And but I was paid with script that first year that I taught school.
Oh, tell us about that.
Well, I got $60 a month.
A month.
And there were 2 20s and a 10, I think, and a 5 maybe, and then some ones. But they led up to 60. I haven't counted it up. But it was about like that. And you could, if someone wanted to pay his taxes, that person would take your script and give you the money for it. But if he would take your script, you had to discount it.
Discount.
Mm-hmm. But it carried interest if you could afford to have kept it yourself. But we needed it. Well, it was depression, and people didn't get the teeth fixed during the depression.
No.
And so usually I would take a 20 and I might go to a store. Or you could buy an awful lot of things for $20. You could buy you a new winter coat, maybe a pair of shoes and a hat. But if you didn't spend the whole 20 there, they would give you a due bill. They wouldn't give you any cash back for your script. But of course you got your money's worth, but it had to come from that store that they took it from.
Yeah.
It was quite interesting. Of course, that's the first money I'd ever had, and it looked like a wagon wheel to me.
And, of course, the reason for the script, in case some of our younger listeners are not aware, the county or the city simply did not have the money. The taxes had not been collected in cash, and it was a promise to pay sometime. And bore, I think, maybe 6% interest, as you said, if you could afford to kept it.
Which I couldn't.
I don't suppose most teachers could.
Well, no. Well, my father was having a very hard time because, as I said, people didn't get their teeth fixed. If they did, they paid him maybe in a bushel of peanuts or ham, maybe, of course, which was very nice. And, you want to know about something funny? My mother, that many kids, how kids would weigh stuff. Well, she had a great little trunk. And she would lock any of these little goodies, like a bushel of apples or peanuts or something, in the trunk. And at night, she would open the trunk and she'd get out an assortment of goodies, and we would sit down and eat. But then the trunk was locked until the next night. And my hand could be very hard slapped if it tried to get that key.
So we didn't live then, of course, like we do today.
No, of course, and I remember World War I, which was hard times too. Sweetening coffee with molasses and sweetening syrup. Mama made molasses pies and molasses pudding. We all like sweets. I still do. And of course, I remember the flu epidemic, when so many people died in 1918.
Yes, I think I read once that there were 2 million Americans that died. It was the biggest tragedy that ever struck this country.
A little girl in my room at school died that year, and the boy across the street from us died. Of course, I don't remember very many more, but I do know that my father had the flu first. And then several of them, maybe the children took it. Well, he got up. And then Mama took it. And then it went the whole round, but I never did take it. I was 8 years old. And my father and I did everything that was done. Of course, there was a small baby, and of course I rocked the baby to sleep and would take water and food to the to the rest of the family when they wanted it. And then neighbors would come and bring in food, but they wouldn't come in the house. They were afraid of the flu. And I remember when they all got well and Daddy came in and he said, well, I'm going to give my nurse some money. He gave me a silver dollar bill, a silver dollar. And Mom said, oh, you can buy a dress. Oh, I just wanted to hit her because I certainly didn't want to buy a dress with my dollar. I wanted to keep it.
Yes. Oh, those are precious stories. I'm glad we got them recorded here. Marie was on railroad then, of course, too.
Yeah.
NC and St. L that came by Hardin.
But it was too far away. See, we lived out on 12th and Main. The corporation ended. I didn't know what corporation meant, but I knew that was where it ended. At our house. We lived just inside of it.
And that was about a mile and a half, I guess, down to the train station.
So, and of course, we weren't allowed to go that far away from home. We ranged all around and I was a middle child. And here, of course, I wanted to play with the older ones. And all the older kids in the neighborhood would play games, in the evening up until dark. And sometimes they would give me a nickel not to play. Or then I could
that
play.
That made you feel good.
Oh, yes, it did. I was glad to get the nickel. But it hurt my feelings. But sometimes they would let me play if I would be it. And of course, I never could. And if I wasn't it, nobody ever came to hunt me. But I enjoyed it anyway. I just had a ball.
Now, when you started teaching, you made $60. Do you remember what Keith made his first job?
Yes. We left Hardin, and we went to Cincinnati, and he worked with Dun & Bradstreet, and he made $90. But then he decided that he would rather be a traveling representative rather than work in an office, and they paid him $100 expenses, so he got $190. But we had to work so hard because I had to mount the reports. We didn't have time to spend any of it, so we saved most of it, which was good because later he went to the state and he only made $115, and that was in 1938. We went to Frankfurt, and he worked for the state until he went in the service in 44.
Yes.
And then when he got out of the service, we came back to Hardin because we couldn't find a place to live in Frankfurt. I had given up my house and had followed him around over the countryside. And he went in business with Voris. They had that store. It's now, I think, called Black's Grocery. And we stayed there. He stayed there about 3 years, and then he went back with the state and was in Mayfield and Paducah, and then finally became a roving reporter again.
Yes.
And that's what he was when he died. He's been dead, 21 years.
21. I didn't remember how long. I remember him quite well, however. And now, how many children did you and Keith have?
We had two. I have a boy, Charles Irvan, Pace, and he lives in Clarksville. He's a pharmacist, and he has two children, a boy and a girl. And then I have Johnny, who lives over here. He works for ASCS in Benton, and they have two little girls, which are my pride and
He married George Little's daughter. I see him occasionally because I still have the old farm place out that we bought from Mr. Dave Booker. You remember him?
Oh, yeah. See, I lived in his house.
In his house.
I lived there.
Townhouse, I guess they call it.
I lived there 36 years.
And we rented at first for 6 years his place, and then when Mr. Booker got in poor health and they moved away, he became a banker in Keble, and he wanted me to buy that farm. He said, you and your dad ought to buy that. I said, I know you can pay for it. You're a college graduate now. It was 1944. And I said, well, Mr. Booker, I couldn't ever pay for that. I don't have that kind of money. What do you want for it? Well, he said $75 an acre. And so I had managed to save $1,004 that I had in the bank. And so he said, well, I'll fix it where you can buy it. He said, just pay me $500 a year and said, I'd like to have $1,000 down. Well, I never told him. In fact, I didn't tell anybody much, but I wrote a check for $1,000 with a great flourish. That left me only $4 in the bank, of course. Anyway, it's in some of the farm programs, and I see John every now and then when I go to sign up. But I didn't know what had happened to Charles Irvan. It's in Clarksville, Tennessee.
Yeah, he's been there. Both his children were born in Clarksville. He has a boy 24 and a girl 22. And then Johnny's children are 6 and 7.
Well, if you don't mind, try to describe for us Hardin in its glory. When you can.
Oh.
What all did it? Were you there when it had a newspaper?
Oh yes. I was there. There was a drugstore, and when I went down on the train to stay a week, before I was 12, I was given 50 cents. It cost more then. It cost 20 to go and 20 to come home. Then I had a whole dime to spend. And twice during my stay, I got to go down to the drugstore and get a cherry phosphate, I think it was called. And then we would always go around and look in the dry goods store. And I loved going in Ryan and Miller's and to see that ladder that would go along the wall, where they would
I remember that.
shoes.
I thought that was worth $1,000 to me just to see it.
I know it. I just thought that was, I just loved to sit there and see it. And I remember this bench in there, and it had printed on it, Star Brand shoes are better. I remember that. I just see that today. And then, of course, there were several barbershops and 3 doctors, and there was always a restaurant.
Yes.
And then, of course, the hotel was over on the corner. And one of the saddest things I remember is when they moved the old railroad station. I remember, I was teaching over there. See, I taught in Hardin 26 years at that school at Burned a few years ago.
Yes.
And I remember when they moved that railroad station.
That was a sad day.
Yes, it was. And then there was, over to the south of it, there was, I guess it was the Railway Express.
Express and Freight House.
Yeah, Freight House. And I don't know what happened.
Houston Base kept that for a long time, I remember.
What happened to it? Did it just fall down or did it burn?
I can't remember. The railroad must have sold it. I just don't know. Some way or other, that's a blank in my mind.
Well, just the old landmarks burning just break my heart. Now, I still own the farm, in that end of the county. It butts on the Callaway line. And last Halloween, somebody burned my barn. And it makes you feel bad when you think about just
really
old
does.
landmarks. Of course, I thought it was awful when Ryan Miller's store burned.
I hated to see that.
I hated to see that. Of course, I
Well, we're getting close to the end of our time. Do you have some things you'd like to make sure you get on before we
Well, I just love to say how I love Marshall County and think people in Hardin are the prettiest people in the world.
Well, you spent a big part of your life
Yes,
there.
I lived in Hardin for 39 years. And of course, I've been out here almost 2. We, after I married, we spent 10 years away. We would have been married 51 years last summer.
Well,
50 years.
when I drive out to the farm every day, which I do, I miss seeing you there on the corner.
I love just walking up and down that.
Joe Hart Wilson's still across the street.
Yeah, and
Boris Utley.
Boris, and of course Louise, of course, is related to me. Now, we grew up almost like sisters. I visited her. We went with each other to get married. Keith and I went with the Utleys, and the Utleys went with us when we got married. And always real close friends. In fact, I've been up to there and spent a weekend since I've moved down here.
Well, good. Thank you very much. Is it Amanda Nell or Nell?
Nell Amanda.
Nell Amanda Irvan Pace. Thank you so much for allowing me to visit in your beautiful home here. And that completes our oral history lesson for today. This is Ray Mofield speaking. We return you now to our studios.